So now over to Emily, who is going to talk about probably about how we can kind of align cooperatives and the union organising together in a way that's quite practical and on a high street near you. Emily, over to you.
Yeah, thank you to all the other speakers as well. It's such a varied range of speakers. It's been really interesting. So I've got a presentation which I'll need to look at because I'm not as good at speaking from the heart as Dorothy. So I'll just share my screen. Cool. So yeah, as Francis said, I'm going to talk about a kind of an idea and a proposal that came out of some research that I did, and also some of the work that I've done as a workplace rep and a union activist. But I think before I go on to the kind of more optimistic sort of what we could be doing, I kind of want to set out the state of play in terms of working life at the moment, which Henry has already alluded to quite a lot in his talk, and I'll just kind of sort of put in my 2 pennies worth on that as well. So even prior to the current state of play, pre-COVID, if we can remember that, we have borne witness to a crisis of work since the late 1970s. So just a bit of a kind of think tank stats here. Wage share of the economy has declined significantly. So that is the kind of the amount of the economy that is going towards wages for workers rather than sort of national income. And we can link that quite neatly to fall in union density. Particularly that is a direct correlation, a lot more than technological change, which is often given as an explanation for why working conditions and wages have declined so much. And actually we can see a far greater correlation between declining worker power represented through union density. As Henry spoke about quite a lot as well, we've seen the rise of insecure and casualised precarious labour, where workers are denied basic rights. I'm just going to move on. And yeah, I read some research recently that said that nearly 1 in 10 workers engage in platform work, which to me was a really in the persistence of gendered and racialized injustice in the workplace, a dereliction of duty of care, which is a phrase that we actually don't really even use very much anymore, from the workplace towards its workers. Then we also have the kind of impending challenge of the need to transition to a green economy, and we know, as based on historical experience, that technological or significant change doesn't necessarily mean great news for workers unless they are very much at the forefront of directing that change.
Emily,
and then,
sorry, can I jump in? Are you able to put that on presenter mode, your presentation?
Sorry, can I?
We can see it a bit there. We just can't see it. Sorry, jump in.
I mean, it's not actually that interesting. You can't see
sure it is.
If you click present in the top right-hand corner, that should do it. All right.
So I do have some speaker notes, though. I think I probably won't be able to read those if I do go on to present mode, which I might need to do. So I might need to flip back and forwards if that's all right. Which I actually think I'm going to do now. Hang on, sorry. Yeah. Am I okay to just stick on this mode of present, like if you just kind of try and ignore the screen a bit, and then I can
We can manage.
Rather than reading the screen.
Fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to go on to just thinking about demands and what we should expect from the workplace. So when I started doing the research, I did some research into self-employed workers and challenges faced by the self-employed workforce, which does include precarious workers. We established, myself and my fellow researcher established a bit of a sort of loop you'd expect from the workplace. And I mean, I don't want to necessarily read all of these things out because it shouldn't be exhaustive as well. It should be a continuing conversation about what our demands are. But at the very least, it's decent living wages, sick pay, holiday allowance and pay, remunerated parental leave, pension scheme, agreed hours, recognised professional standards, a legal contract, right to union representation, the ability to withhold labour. These are not things that are guaranteed in the workplace at the moment, and they are quite fundamental material rights that are being denied to lots of workers at present, or not being adequately enforced. I mean, one kind of easy example of that is just having a decent living wage that does actually cover the costs of people's living, is not something that we can see across the workforce. And then kind of more sort of cultural and social factors. Workers should have access to a level of autonomy and control within the workplace. As Dorothy spoke about, control is really important, and not feel like you're just a set of tools. Independence of voice and the ability to be vocal, community and collectivism, a social network, professional development, and a feeling of value and recognition were some of the sort of minimal things that we looked at as we started our research. And then kind of with that also protection against and limits to punitive and excessive control over time and scrutiny over time, low wages that are unable to be to cover the cost of living, pay freezes, costs incurred by the workplace, which we can see is pretty ubiquitous to have costs incurred by the workplace, financial costs, workplace related accidents, and a lack of necessary training or development. And then we should also have protection against more sort of social and cultural factors, compliance with or homogeny of principles and values. So kind of like
I think we've
lost
Emily.
Oh, yeah. Just getting into the things. Okay. Well, maybe we'll get her back in a minute, but we should carry on regardless. I was kind of got a bit of a moment for some conversation actually with some of our other speakers, which I think will be really interesting. And I was thinking about this last week. We had a unique opportunity to have both, a cooperative, a social enterprise, a union, and a think tank. We didn't have a think tank; she's disappeared now in the room. Which I thought was a unique opportunity to have a conversation about sort of, I suppose, power in work. And I tried to crack a gag about this over Twitter last week, but it kind of fell like a piece of tumbleweed from my Twitter feed. And I suppose I'm really interested in the idea of culture and the sort of culture of democracy. And they sort of say, I mean, this is a question for all our speakers really, and I'm kind of interested in your views. Culture sort of eats structure for breakfast, and they say that democracy is downstream from culture, and we've certainly seen that going on with sort of culture wars and things that are around us. I mean, my question is culture, is the culture of democracy in the workplace equally, if not more important than a structure of democracy? And I'm interested what our speakers think of that. So I want to go first.
I see Emily's just come back, so maybe the speakers can dwell on that when it finishes off.
Yeah,
hold that question.
Sorry about that, guys. I would say that another basic minimum of the workplace is having decent internet connection, which is really not something that I seem to be doing well with so far. Don't know. I think it's because I've got too many tabs open, but yeah, apologies about that. I will just rattle through the rest of my presentation so that we're not too delayed, and I'm really sorry about that. Right, I'm just going to share my screen again and hope that it goes more smoothly. I think I'm not allowed to screen share because I'm no longer a host. I've been I've been demoted.
We can reinstate you, I'm sure.
Thank you. Is it a punishment for my bad internet connection?
We don't do that around here. And we've got plenty of time as well.
Okay, that's good. Thank you to the other speakers for being so concise. All right, so let's hope this is working. Yeah, so yeah, that's I just kind of set out a bit of a sense of the basic demands that we should have from our working lives, which I think are demands that often we have forgotten about as standards have become so dialed down. It's often the case that we find ourselves as people in the kind of progressive end of the spectrum trying to fight for those rights to be reinstated, rather than having the vision of what we should actually be expecting, the picture of what we should be expecting. But compounded with the kind of dialing down of working conditions, we've got sort of twin challenges of the pandemic and the impact upon the workplace and the workforce of that. And green transition itself. So the rise of poor quality and insecure work and the failure for the workplace to accommodate needs has highlighted the current crisis that we face post-lockdown. And the anticipated unemployment crisis could serve to working workers' power even further, because obviously whilst 10 or 50 people are kind of waiting to get your job, it's very difficult to be able to demand for what sort of increased rights and better your conditions. And the only way to kind of fight that is through collectivizing our demands and our struggle. And then in terms of green transition, the climate emergency has not gone away in the pandemic, and we will be facing the need for significant change to lots of roles in the workplace, across the workforce, across different parts of the economy, in high carbon industries, and also industries that includes industries that aren't necessarily that obviously high carbon. So things like retail, for instance, is what I'm looking at the moment, and that will need significant change if we are to meet the challenges of decarbonising the economy. But I recently read a series of essays by Arundhati Roy, who is a novelist, but more recently an essayist. And she talks about this concept of the pandemic as a portal, which I think is a really, the way that she articulates it is was perfect, really, because we shouldn't see what's happened in the pandemic as a positive thing. I think it's really negative when people frame it in that way, because obviously we also have to register the significant amounts of death and grief and mental health crisis that's come as a result of it. But we can see it as what Arundhati Roy calls a portal for seizing an opportunity to kind of change the world and the way that we work. And there's a couple of things that are quite specific to the world of work that have come out of the pandemic that I think we should be seizing. So one of those is the social value of work and people sort of reassessing the social value of work. So we've got this term key workers now, and that is basically a kind of catch-all phrase to have to show work of undisputed social value, and you kind of, the way that I think a lot of people are thinking about this at the moment anecdotally is that pitted against what the anthropologist David Graeber calls bullshit jobs. Apologies for the language there. which are either completely unnecessary and harmful to the worker because there's no value in them, or deeply harmful for society. And David Graeber points to advertising as that. But there's lots of other examples. The financial sector can be as ripe with examples there. So that kind of analysis, that fresh analysis of the social value of work, is something that I think is really worth capitalising on. And then secondly, sort of thinking about the unemployment crisis that we're about to face in terms of a redistribution of employment. And at the New Economics Foundation, where Francis and I work, we have made the case for decades now on shorter working hours and the value of shorter working hours. So that might be a shorter working week or shorter working days. But basically what it means is that less of our life is taken up by work, and we are more free to spend time doing things that we love, having greater leisure time, more time to dedicate to caring work. It can have really significant environmental impacts, because disposable kind of culture is something that is very much as a result of a kind of a lack of time for lots of people, because so much of their life is consumed by work. So thinking about instead of lots of people being overworked and lots of people either being underemployed or unemployed, thinking about that in terms of a redistribution of employment and everyone's working hours becoming reduced as a result, is another opportunity that we should be sort of thinking about right now. And then finally, the racialized impacts of the crisis is something that, despite the government's most recent investigation into institutional racism, we have seen the massive disproportionate impact upon BAME communities of the crisis, and that being linked to social factors that obviously really need addressing. And particularly we can see this in the workplace with the high proportion of key workers who are BAME and the high proportion of healthcare staff, BAME healthcare staff, who've been lost as a result of the crisis, and the kind of need again to kind of address the gendered and racialized disparities in the workplace that we saw in 2019 when we did some research on the state of work, and has only become even more evident in the wake of the pandemic. So I've kind of flitted backwards and forwards a bit in terms of talking about particular moments right now in terms of green transition and the pandemic. But this particular proposal came out of some research that was prior to COVID. It was some research that we did in 2019, as I referenced before, on self-employed workers and the challenges facing the self-employed workforce. So we kind of thought about the varying crises that are facing us as workers across the workforce, and the need for sort of collectivizing and kind of pushing back against these things. And also that kind of coupled with the declining union density and the need for revitalizing that, and also kind of bringing or linking that with the need to revitalize community spaces as well, that we have seen really massively decimated as a result of austerity and closure of libraries, decline of the British High Street. And yeah, so we kind of came up with a concept that was based on historical and global examples of what we termed worker centres, with the title being specifically something that would recognise that everyone who needs to work, which is the vast majority of the population, is a worker of some sorts, whether they're unemployed, precariously employed, or in secure employment. You know, that the need to be a worker is obviously pressing for all of those different categories of people, and there should be no differentiation between workers and communities. So the proposal that we kind of came up with just had this kind of utopian vision that was based on, lots of reading that we were doing at the time, and kind of it's a sort of idea of a physical space for unions to work from and to organize from, a kind of community space and a collective space, a space for atomized workers to feel company and solidarity through co-working kind of physical space, a place for training and skills, and also political education by way of exposure, as well as in more formal kind of context, and mutual financial support and redistribution of social and cultural capital for navigating social security and services. So yeah, I mean, just to sort of go back to the research specifically, I've kind of identified the challenges that we're facing in our working lives at the moment, but the challenges that we identified in the focus groups that we were working in were that a lot of these the issues that are faced in the traditional workplace, or the kind of employed workplace, are exactly the same in the self-employed workforce, and instead of it being pull factors and you know, this like wonderful idea of self-employment, of being your own boss and you know, being able to escape from the worst parts of the workplace, was really not something that was realized for a lot of the workers that we spoke to, well, for all of the workers that we spoke to actually. And then the kind of additional pressures of the blurred boundaries of the workplace, greater responsibility for overheads, loneliness and isolation. And so a lot of the kind of features that we proposed in the worker centre idea speak to the things directly mentioned by our participants. So yeah, I mean, Henry has already kind of spoken quite a lot about the necessity of building worker power, and I won't repeat things that he said because he's got much more experience than me in this sense, but it certainly isn't the case that we will have a better working life unless we fight for it. You know, we do see that automation is taking away some of the worst jobs, but also, you know, that will just increase unemployment unless workers are kind of at the forefront dictating how that change will happen. And there have been some fantastic examples of new tactics emerging to build worker power that meet the challenges that we're facing at the moment. IWGB have been fantastic in organising gig economy workers, who are some of the most atomised and disenfranchised workers in society. If that can be done, then honestly, anything can be done. And then also thinking about CWU Union have done some work on trying to get, well, have done work on, as postal work has become increasingly automated, reducing the working week of those workers with no decrease in pay as productivity has stayed the same. And we want to see more of that, obviously, as worker power can start dictating the direction of travel rather than us being beholden to change with incredibly negative consequences. And so I'm just wary of time here, apologies. But yeah, just to kind of to conclude, we looked at some really incredible global inspirations to base our proposal on. Bargaining for the common good is something that brings together community organisations and community organising with trade unions specifically to kind of identify shared challenges, and that's something that is a real inspiration for what we proposed with the worker centres. Another example was Self-Employed Women's Association of India, which are a trade union that was formed in the 1970s and recognises full employment or good employment as being beyond the boundaries of the workplace, and also including things like social security, childcare and housing. So it's not kind of limiting our sites to just the workplace, which again is something that the worker centres would seek to address through the kind of advisory capacity and political education. And then, kind of, as I said right at the beginning, what we really need to be doing just informally but right away is raising our expectations and demands as workers, and educating each other on what our demands of the workplace should be, and not settling for any less. It's very easy to think that you're expecting too much from the workplace, and you sometimes have to bolster each other in raising those demands. And then, just the other two, foster solidarity with migrant workers. That's essential for achieving workplace justice, and political education, which kind of speaks to the first one. But it's definitely something that is needed to kind of revitalise community life and increase our well-being in the workplace and our paying conditions.